Against recruit a team of teenagers with attitudes.
Go! Voltron Force!
What? That's how it happened!
迫る初夏地獄の軍団我らを狙う黒い影世界の平和を守るため Go! Go! Let's go! 輝くマシンライダーライダー仮面ライダー仮面ライダーライダーライダー
Yeah, you knew this was coming.
In the 1980s, Haim Saban came across Sentai and wanted to do a show adapting it from its premises, shooting a pilot episode based around Bioman. Such didn't pan out, but he kept the tape with him for years afterwards, representing the idea of adapting this foreign show into a superhero action series. Eventually, around 1992, early 1993, he succeeded in getting the attention of those running the Fox Kids programming block, but by that point, the Bioman footage was too old, deciding then to contact Toei to try and license a newer series, the aforereviewed Zyuranger. This happened to be a significant stroke of good timing, as that year Jurassic Park came out, igniting the imagination of kids and teens all about everything dinosaurs. So for many, superheroes and giant robots based on dinosaurs is like putting peanut butter in chocolate, and would prove to be the most popular thing since the Transformers created the Dinobots.
Unfortunately, the show in development kind of fell into some of the trappings of broad-range entertainment of the time. The show, while heavy in action, comes off as really, well, saved by the belly in its first season, and has not aged well at all.
But wait, so many people are ready to say to me, Power Rangers is awesome! MMPR forever! There was never anything better after the original generation!
It's really not, no. The series improves a lot from where it started out as. Most seasons actually doing far better than it story-wise, and even fans of just the Zordon era say the show doesn't really get good until the second season. But that doesn't make it awful either.
And for me personally, this is the threshold between the below-average seasons and the bad ones. You need to do worse than this season does in its failings to actually be an awful season of Power Rangers.
I still rate it better than Zyuranger in a lot of respects, as, hell, it's actually about the team as opposed to the superfluous guest child actor of the week. But certainly due to the divergences from that, the story issues fall firmly on the creative staff of the time, and how they didn't seem to know what they wanted for the show. The setting and story pieces would vary wildly.
But unlike later ones that chart lower than it, this one is the most forgivable, as it was the first one. No one had really tried to do something like this. Sure, Godzilla movies and Ultraman had been imported and dubbed, several 70s Toei shows saw subtitled broadcasts in Hawaii, and there was that weird thing that happened with the recut of Dynaman.
We don't talk about the Dynaman dub. We do not talk about the Dynaman dub.
And a number of 70s and 80s anime, when dubbed, reflected nothing of their original source material from a story perspective, such as what was done multiple times to Gatchaman, or Go Lion into Voltron.
And part of that is why that was the opening joke of this video.
But a full-on adaptation getting in live actors to go with recut footage from a source material? This was pretty new and innovative.
And not even the Raymond Burr Godzilla King of the Monsters counts. Like I said in my review of that, the new scenes added to that film weren't intrusive. They were providing a different perspective that made the core of the story more accessible, while not actually changing anything at its core. Here, it's obviously taking new actors, new set pieces, and injecting them into the frameworks of plots from Zyuranger, excised of the child-focused nonsense for their own story stuff, with the occasional original or elaborate and interesting twist on things. So by saying it's the worst of the original Mighty Morphin seasons, I mean that in the terms of the inexperience at even doing this kind of work most prominently shows itself, and detracts from the better content. But lessons were learned about what not to do, which made the following years with the occasional stumbling block, a lot better.
And Zyuranger was a pretty abnormal Sentai to begin with, so the fact that they got a lot workable and actually managed a fairly serious tone to the silliness did make some of the more nonsensical stuff work. But as was pointed out by Linkara during his History of Power Rangers videos, the only story arc the first season had revolved around Tommy and the state of his powers, partly because that is the only ongoing story Zyuranger even had for them to adapt, since they abandoned the plot of a woman who's spiteful of the world in the wake of her son's death being manipulated by a great force.
Then again, that was too late in the series for it to matter, and they squandered such in the source material, so I can understand them not wanting to do that backstory for Rita at that time. As once more, this was unfamiliar territory, and they didn't know what would fly. Though ironically, we ended up getting that Forgotten Son about 15 years later.
After all these years, I'm free!
Yeah, any which way around it, Thrax is a continuity snarl. There's a reason Once Ranger is the third worst team-up.
And when more recent series have gone back to MMPR to try and nostalgify the recent series, I really think they forgot that they abandoned a lot of nonsense from the first season for a reason. They shouldn't be looking at Season 1, but Season 3 or Zeo where the storytelling of the original years was best. Or the standalone stories of Season 2 with how you could make a fun villain be taken seriously in universe, if they really feel they needed to bank on it.
You don't, by the way. The show was successful past the MMPR seasons for a reason. Good stories, good characters, good adaptation work, no pandering. I'd like to see them really compete with or outdo the Sentai they're basing stuff on again. And I don't think the franchise could survive it getting as bad as Ninja did.
The show was written and adapted by Tony Oliver, Shuki Levy, Steve Kramer, Cheryl Saban, Jeff Deckman, Ronnie Sperling, Julianne Clem, Gary Glassberg, Stuart St. John, Mark Hoffmeyer, Tom Weiner, Mark Ryan, Cindy McKay, Peggy Nickel, and Chris Shawn during its first 40 episodes, with Mark Litton, Shel Danielson, and future showrunner Douglas Sloan joining in the Zoo 2 sect of the show. Direction in turn being executed by Adrian Carr, Robert Hughes, Jeff Reiner, David Blythe, Shuki Levy, and Terrence H. Wickless, with Worth Keeter and Jon Stewart, not that Sean Stewart, likewise joining with the Zoo 2 stuff.
Honestly, Cheryl Saban early on I think was the worst writer on the show. She seemed to mostly mix it up between transcribing the Sentai episodes with the original story plots they were injecting, not gelling with those stories, and also with them seeming the most out-of-place childish over having something of original merit. Some of the other original things she did was the badly thought-out slang, such as the long-derided more phenomenal. Yeah, that's a phrase even Power Rangers fans tend to hate. And her brainchild was also a bunch of Billy's needless technobabble.
And the supervising producer for the first season in charge of all this creative staff, alongside the crew for the second, was Tony Oliver. Tommy Oliver's surname later given in homage to him and how he would help shape the show into its initial success. The show featured behind the scenes a long list of names that would later become synonymous with Power Rangers, just a sampling being Jonathan Zacher and Judd Lynn, both starting out in production roles nowhere near the creative team or showrunner roles they'd later have. The former as part of the human resources team, and the other a unit production manager involved in location scouting and acquiring the resources the show needed for its original footage. And of course, how can I forget Ron Wasserman, the musical composer for most of the series, especially its opening theme, which is a classic. It's one of the things that informed my general preference for rock music and metal, but really what plays is only the opening and chorus for the song. Ron Wasserman really didn't do just short jingles. He tended to craft them as if they were full soundtrack scores, much like most Toku songs are normally formatted. This having led to his music's longevity in comparison to later scoring, as it's a different approach to the material than other scribes attached to Power Rangers would take. Here's a direct quote from him on this subject. "In anything I've written that's been for kids, I never write for kids. I'm writing for myself. I'm writing for adults. Because I don't ever talk down to kids. I never have. That's, I think, why that theme became so huge."
Why do so many companies not get this?
Incidentally, Ron Wasserman is among the lost list of talents of Bond Entertainment.
To be clear, I don't mean Haim Saban unless I specifically say Haim Saban. I'm referring to the company with this kind of thing. That's the problem when you name the company after yourself, and then productions under that company you don't actually have regular say in.
Treated like garbage, refusing to properly contract the man for his musical talents that, more than anything else, are what made a lot of Saban-produced shows work, preferring to keep him, like most of their workers, as work-for-hire staff, the entire company, and by proxy Power Rangers production staff, being non-union, which more than once would prove to shoot themselves in the foot. Half of why his music was so good was he turned his frustration and fueled it into his passion. And the reason the later Power Rangers series, Past in Space, stopped using his music is he left the company because they didn't treat him with the respect you'd give a professional that's done great work for you.
And the show never really recaptured his talent whenever they've tried, instead of doing something different. Noam Keneal is the man who scored most of Neo Saban Power Rangers in an attempt to recreate his work, and I hate his music. The Samurai and Megaforce covers of the original theme are on my worst music of Power Rangers list, showing the contrast simply from a difference of composers to the exact same work.
If you'd like to see more of Ron Wasserman's work, however, look up the band Fisher, and the dude has composed thousands of songs for television and movies. So, for him, leaving Saban in 1998 was probably the best decision, even with the impact he made on all of our childhoods with his scores.
That and, him coming back briefly to Power Rangers for SPD's theme.
Though something odd you might notice is how the music is used in the opening in its later updates. They added in superfluous sound effects over the music to match some of the things they were putting on the screen, and then left in those sound effects when they changed what was being depicted.
What the hell? I mean, clearly that wasn't Ron Wasserman doing that, but did no one think to cut those out when what they were put in for no longer synced up?
Well, the series opens with,
You're gonna make me, little girl?
Wait, did I put in the wrong show?
no, this is Power Rangers Pilot. The later shown first episode, Day of the Dumpster, was just the first aired episode, whereas this was the show's original concept draft presented to the network to pick it up. It's kind of surreal to watch, with how dimly lit it is, alongside the bowling alley used for the teen hangout.
Did anyone in the 90s actually hang out at a bowling alley? It feels more like an 80s thing.
But it legitimately appears a bit more coherent in its story setup of the group as friends before getting dragged into the general story structure of the first episode, even having a bit better showcasing of their initial skill. In a way, the real first episode seems like a patchwork version of this one, as it's the same up to a point, just with differing civilian stuff, as that alley wouldn't be their main recreational set once the show had an actual budget.
Though Power Rangers would later pull a Star Trek's Cage into the menagerie with this pilot, editing it down and showcasing it as a lost episode special in 1999.
Anyways, Day of the Dumpster. The show uses Zyuranger stock footage to showcase the unsealing of our evil, Rita Repulsa. Thus we get shots of planet Nemesis. The presumption has always been that Rita was actually sealed away and set up on the moon, especially with how weird the moon is in Power Rangers, with the Earth being the closest planet. It makes sense why certain powers would set up a base there then, but a lot quibble on that point. Her breakout has not gone unnoticed, however. While she sets up shop in her palace, later retconned to be a stronghold of good that had been corrupted for evil's purpose, we are introduced to the main cast of the show. Jason Lee Scott, a martial arts instructor. Zach Taylor, a fun-loving dancer. Trini Kwan, who's, very active in charities and volunteer work?
Yeah, Trini is the least developed and least used of the original cast for story stuff.
Well, then there's Kimberly Ann Hart, the classically Californian gymnast, and Belly Cranston, who is, well...
I finally completed a narrow beam transmission module that will allow wave function over an extended interval.
And has an irritating tendency to use words no one else can understand.
Oh yeah, the original characterization is pretty shallow.
Hell, even the bullying antics of breakout characters Bulk and Skull would often seem forced into the situation with no other depth to them, originally meant to antagonize the Five in the normal life plots of the day, but were almost always ineffective and meant to be a anti-bullying PSA in how they'd always get what was coming to them. Usually through them being arrogant blowhards that couldn't match up to their own hype, especially in comparison to the more straight-laced leads. But over time more represented a gray area in morality, or moreover an expression of following one's impulses over learning control and discipline, and how they were more interested in doing what they wanted, only for the reality of their experiences in the world to eventually shape them. And much of what's seen of them can be interpreted as attempts to prove themselves, that they like how they are, and shouldn't make them any less of a person worthy of respect, in comparison to the more Paragon-like leads they are constantly compared to, though it's often their own actions which hamper them on obtaining this recognition.
Most of that is in hindsight from their 6 years of development, and not what you see in the first season. Much of the slapstick early on also feels like disproportionate retribution as opposed to karma, the humiliation the two suffer facilitating the cycle of antagonism.
But Rita triggers her first attack, an earthquake, which results in an incoming message from the big giant head. This is Zordon, who's effectively the wise sage counterpart to Barza from Zyuranger. But while Barza was a senile old man, Zordon still has all his wits about him.
Teleport to us 5 overbearing and over-emotional humans.
For the most part. 10,000 years in the tube is probably not helping that.
No, not that, not teenagers.
Can this marriage be saved?
And this is Alpha 5. Played by acclaimed actor and voice actor Richard Stephen Horvitz, Alpha being the first role he did voice work for, which launched a career of beloved cult roles.
In fact, a lot of Power Rangers voice actors would come to be infamous and staples of the industry for a time. Bob Pappenbrook, Barbara Goodson, Robert Axelrod, Kerrigan Mahan, Wendy Lee, Brianne Siddall, Tom Weiner. It's a long list of memorable vocal talent that a lot of us first heard in the 90s through this show. Hell, Bryan Cranston, yes, the Breaking Bad guy, used to voice Monsters of the Week. Kind of made sense why he'd be up for voicing Zordon in the 2017 movie.
Alpha is pretty much Zordon's only connection to the outside world, as he is incapable of interacting with it due to being stuck in a time warp. The sage relying on the robot to trigger all of the command center's controls. Unfortunately, Alpha early on is an irritating nuisance, trying to be hip and connecting with the kids, only to be really, really annoying with it.
Hasta la pizza, baby.
That was crunk.
And yeah, they later pulled this again with Alpha 6, and then even later on with Pinso, who was the most insufferable of the three, showing they didn't understand the problem with them early on. It's amazing sometimes that they didn't actually end up making Circuit a nuisance in Time Force.
And yeah, Zordon has Alpha 5 choose 5 teens at random, which just so happens to be the ones that were focused on before. Convenient! Why did he choose them anyways?
There's a simple explanation.
No! We are not doing that joke. It's overused in the fandom as it is.
He explains the plot of the show, how they've been selected, pretty much at random, to become the champions of good, the Power Rangers, giving them their basic gear and descriptions of their powers, and they really don't believe what he's saying, leaving with little fanfare.
It's strange when coming back to this, that they almost didn't accept the call, the duty presented to them to help people with superpowers. They were weirded out, shown the video clips, and left.
Hey guys, you don't even know what you're talking about. We were talking to a giant floating head.
Yeah, it's a silly premise to pick people at random for this, those who have no real personal stake in the conflict. With reflection, it might have been better for them to stumble across all this somehow and be asked to help. Their later showcased nobility coming to make them accept, over just shoving all of this onto them as if it was a declaration of, "You've been drafted, suckers!" Which it was not intended as, and most entries, even Overdrive, address this better.
It's only when Rita acts that they get proof of his words and, in defending themselves, that they find they actually can do this, gain the confidence and see it's possible to be the world's protectors, and agree to become the Power Rangers. They weren't drafted, they didn't accept without any actual thoughts, they were admittedly made targets by Zordon leaving them with the Morphers, but Rita has never exactly been considered a tactical genius and couldn't see inside the command center, so no, they turned him down. So it kind of is her own damn fault. Which brings us to the black actor being the Black Ranger, and the Asian actress being the Yellow Ranger, and the racial connotations of both. This was not intentional. As shown from the original pilot, Trini's role had been recast to Thuy Trang, as the original actress, Audrey DuBois, asked for more money than she was getting for the part, so she was fired and replaced.
Like I said, this is a recurring problem with Power Rangers being non-union. As for Zack, according to Walter Jones, he originally auditioned for the part of Billy, but it was felt his acting ability would more fit Zack's personality, as such was originally written.
But yeah, no one in the casting department actually realized what had been done until several episodes of the show had already been completed. It was an honest mistake, as early on the show mostly ran off the stock footage from Zyuranger for 95% of the morph fights. Thus, no one was around to really make the connection between the actor's character and the suit they were aligned to. There were profuse apologies, admissions of them just not seeing it until it was too late to correct, and the various staffs have for the most part avoided making the same mistake again, perpetuating a cycle of diverse casting and role assignment for the teams when new actors would need to be brought in, helping give the message that anyone could be a Power Ranger.
Though it's ironic that, as of recording this in 2016, there is yet to be an Asian Red Ranger, even in the series that refused to remove most of the Japanese cultural references for very stupid reasons. I mean, I know people say they have Asian Rangers in Sentai, but Power Rangers, despite being based on Sentai, is not Sentai. Power Rangers does not make that casting restriction. Thus, it's weird they have yet to do this. I don't know, the preview information for Ninja Steel has not popped up as I'm recording this. Maybe they'll do it in that show.
As their first battle against Goldar concludes, Zordon drags them back to the base, and gives them only 3 rules they have to follow. Don't use their powers for personal gain. Never escalate a conflict unless an enemy forces your hand, meaning no using the mecha to start out a battle. And keep their identities secret from the public.
We are the Power Rangers.
I don't know, you guys. I mean, the outfits are cool and everything, but my hair gets all tangled up inside the helmets.
Ah yes, the Vapid Valley girl. So glad she grew out of that.
Honestly, it does not start out bad at all. It's goofy as all hell, and honestly, the pacing in the original pilot was a bit better. The dialogue is very awkward, and the setup rushed so as to establish the show in as little time as possible. But it's the first episode for an unproven concept. You expect that from such.
Thing is, a fair feeling of the goofiness comes from the music accenting things, and the Bulk and Skull stuff, which were originally meant to be comedy anyways. So in comparison to a lot of more recent stuff, it still feels pretty balanced, and the music as much makes it help feel fun as it can at times detract.
And while the original footage does work to an extent with the Zyuranger stuff, there's a lot of awkward editing of the content, both the stock and new stuff, that shows the inexperience issue that would be what mostly drags this season down over others. Especially with the focus on superfluous diversions that, when watching the show while older, seems really out of place.
Yeah, I am so glad they toned that down. The dialogue quality likewise doesn't really improve.
And a lot of the early episodes did show how little budget they were operating under, with how they just kept recycling the same sets as much as they could, though over time they'd showcased more and more recurring sets or shoot outdoors.
A bit of an amusing anecdote about that budget. The production team apparently so often lost the prop morphers that they just go and get spares from a toy store, as back then Band of America was pretty much just importing the Japanese toys with alternative stickers. It's been a tradition continued on to this day to varying extents, even though now the BOA variants are vastly inferior to the Bandai of Japan originals. Megaforce using the premium Bandai one-click Ranger keys, for example.
Some of the immediately following episodes would be more mediocre character and setting establishment, as the problem with each of the Rangers is they're, well, left as two-dimensional in the first season. Not much more than the initial character descriptor, much in the way Zyuranger had that problem with its cast. I view it as better here, however, as each of them are more given time to play to that and off of the other characters, as opposed to that time being taken from them. And in lieu of tangible developments, we see moments which in hindsight feel as if they are the beginnings of their journey to better themselves, or just moments where we learn a bit more about them as people.
Much like Zyuranger, a lot of the episodes don't affect anything, nor are relevant as it's just plot of the day, fight scene, resolution. The production and broadcast order for the season is also all over the place, at least early on when ongoing continuity didn't matter. So this time, I'm going by the order on the DVDs.
Each would over time establish some recurring supporting characters, most prominently Ernie, who runs arguably Angel Grove's most successful business, the Angel Grove Youth Center, which is one of the longest mainstays of the show, mainly because it was shown to be a really flexible set. So early on, Ernie would almost be an extended cast member, and the location would over time be shown undergoing remodeling. It's also been stated that originally Ernie was supposed to figure out the Rangers' identities off-screen, and that shows appreciation of them. He endeavored to be supportive of their efforts in any way they could, explaining why he often would give them food and drinks on the house. Personally though, considering how often they in turn help out the youth center and setting up its various activities, it could have easily been an effective, fair barter arrangement between them. Then there's Mr. Kaplan, a teacher and principal at Angel Grove High, who often ends up irritated at Bulk and Skull's antics. And Miss Appleby, their most seen normal teacher, who seems to teach high school kids as if they were in kindergarten. Lastly, of the recurring main cast is Angela, a girl who Zack crushes on, solely part of his subplot about him trying to date her, and she on average has 3 lines per appearance and rarely actually does anything other than turn Zack down. In turn, the other characters would undergo subtle shifts as well. While Goldar had a much higher growling than the latter guttural voice he'd settle into for the rest of his appearances, Kerrigan Mahan would have difficulties maintaining that voice not long into the season due to the vocal strain, and would begin experimenting to find one that didn't cause such effects on him. The final voice coming around in the mid-40s, and, like said, would last until the character's final appearance during In Space. Anyways, High Five most focused on Trini overcoming one of the most common fears around, that of heights, in order to help Billy out of a jam in their next fight, due to him not being a fighter, and unable to fight off the foot soldiers, which are renamed putties.
While also showcasing one of the stupidest attacks in the series, and that is saying something.
Let's do it!
It's also a bit focused on Billy, due to him creating another of the staples for the Zordon era, the team's communicators, which keeps them in contact with Zordon, so he doesn't just drag them out of the middle of public places when they're needed. The episode Teamwork in turn establishes the group's school, Angel Grove High, and how they are ridiculously involved in charities, community outreach, and volunteer work. This is admittedly one of its more annoying aspects, as there is no real way teenagers would be this involved in this stuff. I mean, some would, but in my experience...
Recycle that.
Yeah, this is kind of why we love the two. While they're written to be jerks, they also more come off as the ids of real people. Part of the shtick being when they're beaten down, it's metaphorically suppressing the worst aspects of ourselves. At least until the two also begin to show they're better people as time moves on.
Hell, even the guys weren't that enthused about this, even though they'd later shown to be all for this kind of thing. But as Rita attacks them, it also showcases Zordon's recurring trend of keeping secrets or being otherwise knowledgeable on special devices, legends, pursuits, or quests relating to their powers and enemies. As opposed to this foreshadowing him eventually being evil with his secret-keeping, it instead establishes him being a wizened figure who takes actions only when needed. Not solving the problems of the weak for them, but providing them the resources and tools through which they can grasp victory themselves. Thus, unlike Zoolander, it does more feel like the team works for and earns their victories. A pressing engagement shows Rita's attempts to isolate Jason, going with the old adage, defeat the leader and the rest will fall. It shows she knows where her priorities are, and that she needs to get rid of them before she can start her real conquest. Whereas Bandora was mostly content being spiteful, even though many of Rita's plots would end up feeling, frankly, petty in comparison to her counterparts or other Power Rangers big bads.
But as I keep saying, MMPR is pretty low on the totem pole, and part of it is in how many of its episodes have aged absolutely horribly, and that's a lot of the filler episodes going forward.
The first of which being Different Drum, where Rita uses a monster to hypnotize people at the youth center to lay a trap for the Rangers, only for a convenient deaf woman to see the entire event. But the plan they're trying to trick the Rangers into is just to hypnotize them with music? Really? That's all you were going to do? Okay, here, the problem with doing such a plot is, thanks to the stock footage, it never actually attempts that plot at all, meaning it's solely a foolish diversion from anything tangible. Though props for spotlighting differently abled people. Food Fight is similarly stupid, despite it always appearing in the credits, with the youth center holding a cultural food festival for charity, as an excuse to pull out the pig monster, who devours all the food, except for the radish, which is revealed to make it sick. It is also known for, well...
This is something I've always been curious about. Has anyone ever actually been in a food fight? Or is this some stupid television concept no one's supposed to take seriously in the first place?
While Power Rangers excised a lot of the stupid child plots, they didn't get rid of all of them. And Big Sisters shows Kimberly and Trini volunteering, again, to a program where teens mentor younger kids. Such with, is that Ted Raimi in a dress? It's pretty much the first straight adaptation of one of Zyuranger stories, and while they do it justice, as it was a stupid episode to begin with, this being based on the first ones about the dinosaur eggs, it's not pleasant to sit through, especially since the eggs are never seen again. It does, however, introduce the Rad Bug, one of Billy's inventions which acts as a backup transport, and also Power Rangers' tradition of dubbing over the child actors they get so their lack of acting ability wouldn't negatively detract from the show. Only the dub job is ridiculously obvious. Happy Birthday, Zach has Zach be bummed as he thinks everyone forgot his birthday, even as the others do the cliché surprise party sticked, but is notable for being one of the times in the show the Zyuranger appear as part of the stock footage. Goshi used as a stand-in for a Great Warrior the Monster of the Week defeated in its prior use, which also establishes much of their servant ranks are those they've used before. The time point at which her forces were sealed now provided the context that many of her monsters may have been the inspiration for such myths. Guy, unintentionally shows the Rangers as jerks, for at a science fair, while Bulk and Skull are dismissive of various silly inventions, they end up wrecking a few of the displays through antagonizing them, which gets Billy's friend Willie disqualified. The Rangers never own up to this, and because of the boy being demoralized and isolated, he's targeted by Rita to take his intelligence. Though why she doesn't target anyone else at the science fair, or even Billy, for this is quite baffling. I think by this point the group had become so inundated to dealing with Bulk and Skull being jerky, though, that they may have overreacted. But they never really get the comeuppance for something that is their fault, resulting in the beginning of the breaking Aesop involving Bulk and Skull's inception and eventual evolution that never really be addressed. Power Ranger Punks is the season's second direct story adaptation of when Dan and May had their alignments swapped, and is both better and worse. The setup and setting elements more permit this making sense, but Billy and Kimberly, instead of acting like the opposites of themselves, act like Bulk and Skull.
You are my kind of man.
Though for some reason Kimberly in that leather jacket seems like it'd be a good look for her. I wonder why that is.
Peace, Love, and Woe begins another recurring plot device for Power Rangers, the one-off Billy Cranston love interest. Seriously, they give him a lot of them, which only get more uncomfortable in hindsight. The girl being abducted as Rita plans to have a monster banish everyone to another dimension, only for it to choose the exact wrong target as it didn't know what a Power Ranger looked like.
To be fair, as opposed to the Psycho Rangers not knowing what the Space Rangers look like out of suit, at least Rita doesn't keep visual records of them, so it's an easy mistake.
Foul Play in the Sky adapts Zyuranger 13's sleeping potion plot, but instead of afflicting Kimberly with it, it's her Uncle Steve, who is affected by it while he's taking her out flying, which more prominently threatens her life than May being left to sleep forever. If it weren't for Alpha talking her through landing, the plane would have crashed. Though no one considers just teleporting everyone out, or at least only suggest Kim alone escape. Hell, even teleporting the entire plane to the ground would have been an easy solution.
Also, hi Doug Sloan! Seriously, that's Doug Sloan, one of the series' later writers and showrunners. A lot of the production crew ended up playing minor roles every now and then.
Still, in a way this can be seen as Kim's first steps to going from Valley Girl gymnast to capable and talented in her own right, as it's up to her to save everyone on the plane. Some people question why Kim wouldn't be able to fly a plane, since their Zord's the only one that flies, but prior dialogue establishes their powers are tied into the ability to pilot solely their Zords, so would not apply to other machinery. That, and the mechs have a limited level of sentience, even in this series. For Whom the Bell Tolls is another stupid episode, and it's mainly from the framing that makes it awful, as it starts with the Rangers in class, also introducing recurring teacher Miss Appleby, but with a lesson and topic more befitting kindergartners with the show and tell that goes on. For the needed setup, I could see this being a cultural research paper on one's ancestry, but since the elephant in the room for the series has always been the accidental casting of an Asian Yellow Ranger and a Black Ranger, I don't think that was on anyone's minds.
Most of the stories involving the Rangers in the classroom would be problematic for similar reasons. What they did in the classroom often being things meant for far younger individuals.
When this show establishes the group is at the very least 16 by them owning and driving their own vehicles, which kind of timestamps the first 4 seasons of the show as taking place over the course of 2, possibly 3 years, since those still around graduate at the beginning of Turbo, and when they are in the classroom, they're usually in the same classes.
Time is weird in Power Rangers, though. It's rare they ever keep track of such a detail, timestamping any of the series occurs so little, and only a few series actually have it matter, whereas Sentai pretty much sets a given show to occur in the same year it airs, with only a little fudging of when over the year it's showcased to happen.
This episode is also a citation of Season 1's general failing to properly edit the footage, for as I spotlighted in the related Zyuranger episode, the kid from that one is plainly visible in the stock footage.
Could you really not have cropped it so he wasn't just plainly there for all to see? I took a video production class in junior high. We could do that on the student equipment that used Betamax tapes from the 80s.
This is far from the only episode to suffer from such, which could have been fixed by just a simple crop to exclude things in the stock footage the show itself didn't use, such as the Zyuranger's motorcycles popping up in the background a few times. But this one with the kid is just the most egregious. No clowning around. Has the group at a fairground and stalked by evil clowns.
And since Richard Steven Horvitz is a regular cast member, it has never been more appropriate to make this reference.
The clowns are nothing but ultimate evil! They want to be the dominant species on the planet, and they'll destroy us all to make it happen! Destroy us all! Destroy us all! Destroy us all!
And its magic will cause them all to be turned into cardboard cutouts!
Well, it wouldn't take much.
Though as it's adapted from the episode with the sneezing plant, its magic weakness to water remains the same, and remains just as stupid. The Dark Warrior is Power Rangers' counterpart to the Ninja episode, with Trini's Uncle Howard inventing an invisibility potion that she wants to use to make the Power Rangers disappear forever!
Which would pretty much make them invincible in battle since her forces wouldn't be able to see them.
Moreover, the episode is focused on Billy and him taking the next step into developing his skills as a fighter, with him being convinced by the antics of Bulk and Skull to enroll in Jason's martial arts class. Funny story about this one. The scenes of Billy and Jason's class from the first episode, yeah, that was a scene cut from this one and put into Day of the Dumpster because one was running long and the other was too short.
It actually works a bit better if you take that footage and slide it in here, but relatedly it feels as if something is missing from Day of the Dumpster by its absence. I don't know, maybe there was another scene which they removed which was worse, something from a rehash of the original plot the network didn't like, but it kind of shows how deep they were into production to make that kind of big alteration.
Unfortunately, this is where we reach what I consider to be the worst episode of Season 1, and on the short list for the entirety of Mighty Morphin. Switching Places, which is the infamous time Billy invented a body-swapping machine and swapped bodies with Kimberly to show it worked.
What I don't think anyone on the show realized, however, is no one has ever done a good story involving body swapping. I mean it, no one has done it.
Not any Toku series I've seen. Not Stargate, and the repeated use of that in-universe was one of the many critiques of that franchise killer. Star Trek didn't do it well. Red Dwarfs is pretty damn unwatchable. Nothing animated has done it well, and anything that's made a story arc out of it just leaves such as sheerly frustrating if not unwatchable. And don't even get me started on the Disney movies that do that. Hell, Farscapes is the one that of all I've seen that gets the closest to a tolerable one. And that's mainly because it focuses on character revelation through such a divergence of walking in someone else's shoes and seeing how they're viewed from another perspective.
You know, how such a plot is supposed to be used, which bleeds off some of the disturbing elements. Power Rangers, however, didn't break from cardboard characterization of its cast until Season 2. And it would take until Doug Sloan became the supervising producer in Season 3 for the series to begin to show actual tangible character development, and for them to build upon a lot of what was done in the prior seasons for story potential, and to shake up the status quo.
And the talent of performance and direction helps mediate such into at the very least being watchable, and is the only reason in the first place to ever even attempt it. Which is another problem here, as the Season 1 directors really weren't up to the task, and the cast were similarly too inexperienced as actors to pull it off. So what you got here was an awful comedy playing solely off the expected nerd acting like a valley girl, and vice versa, for a very painful 20 minutes on top of something that's already very creepy and disturbing, as it ultimately always boils down to, you made an episode around something that's a fetish.
I'm sorry, I really hate this one, to the point it's hard to feel genuine ire at any of the others in Season 1. And it didn't help that it came right before Green with Evil.